we see these agro-industrial companies involved in research. And I think that is very visible at Wageningen University, but also different places where these companies in a way dictate the terms of what kind of research can be done. I'm not saying that no other research can be done, but if a university wants certain funds or actually gets funds from these companies, then these companies are like, well, we actually would like a research for you to show what the benefits are of this new dairy machine that we've produced. And if they don't like the outcome of that research, they won't publish it. And it makes a lot of sense. If you can buy everything, therefore this is also something that you can buy.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the podcast Digging Deeper by Stichting Boerengroep Wageningen. This podcast will dig deep into agriculture matters and practices. From the fields of the Netherlands to the far-reaching corners of the world, we explore a broad spectrum of agricultural topics to hopefully educate and inspire you, our listeners. Our episodes will provide knowledge from both science and practice to explore every topic from multiple perspectives. We are on a mission for a social, just, and sustainable food system that nourishes both people and the planet. We invite you to be a part of this mission. So, without further ado, let's start digging deeper together by diving into this episode.
Do you want to dig deeper into the wild world of wild plants and foraging? Listen to the Wildpluk podcast. I am Roos Konings, and I'm so lucky to share all this wonderful information about foraging, using and growing wild plants. So, check out the podcast for free on your favorite podcast platform.
Our guest in this episode is Roos Saat. She's a young farmer and activist who co-founded Extinction Rebellion Agriculture and who was the first person to speak at a shareholders meeting of the Rabobank in 2022 about the detrimental consequences of this bank's actions and investments. Roos grew up on a biodynamic farm called the Stadsboerderij, close to Almere, and she is actively involved with Toekomstboeren as well as with the Agro-ecological network. In this episode, we talk about fundamental questions that need to be asked in order to make a socially just farming transition possible, as well as about the importance of direct experiences on farms, including biodynamic ones, the role of the agro-industry, and the different movements that are fighting for agricultural system change. My name is Matti, and I'm the host of today's podcast. Let's dive in. Roos, welcome. I'm super excited to dive into conversation with you today, since initially we would have met 1.5 months ago for an event in Wageningen in the series of Weeding Out Agribusiness. And unfortunately that didn't happen in the end, so I'm super excited to get a second chance today. And I'm visiting you today at the Genneperhoeve, which is a biodynamic farm close to Eindhoven, where you super recently started working. How did you end up here? And can you give a little introduction about yourself and the farm?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me, first of all. I'm very excited about this. Yeah, so, I grew up on a farm. So I was born on a farm and raised on a farm, on a biodynamic farm as well, but close to Almere. And I think for quite a while, when I was a teenager, I did not want to do anything with farming. I wanted to move to the city and study something very different. And I wanted to see what else was out there in the world. But during my studies, I also noticed that I really missed the being outdoors and working with my hands, working on the field, and that I really wasn't a city person. I worked for a while on some different farms and also back home. And then I did my master's in agriculture. And then I decided, okay, I really do want to become a farmer as well. And I, of course, know a lot from back home and from how my family farms, but I also wanted to learn how different farmers have a farm and decide what to do and how to produce their food. And especially because here in Eindhoven, it's also a dairy farm and they have their own cheese makery. And that's a branch of agriculture that I don't know from back home, because we mostly grow crops and we do have cows, but not for dairy production. So I really wanted to learn a different trade within farming, and I figured, why not just take the leap and do that here? So that's how I ended up here. Very short, and with the idea that I want to become a farmer, but I want to learn more about everything that has to do with farming, because it's quite a lot and quite complex. Yeah.
It is, yeah. But an interesting shift to go from working quite practically to going to a bigger city, going to university, which seems like the opposite in a way, and then finding the way back also.
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
And like you already said, you grew up on the Stadsboerderij city farm in Almere, where you also said it has become the way it looks today, despite influence from the government and not thanks to any influence from the government, which is hard and difficult work. Do you see any similarities in that regard also between the farm where you grew up and the Genneperhoeve where you work now?
So I think maybe to elaborate a little bit on what I meant, like I've mentioned it before, that so my family has a biodynamic farm. It means it's nature inclusive, organic and biodynamic. It also means that there is a constant search to produce food in balance with nature. And also doing that very close to the city. So to have a lot of people be able to visit the farm or be involved with the farm that would maybe not be a farmer or meet a farmer normally. And this is a way of doing agriculture that is not the standard in the Netherlands, or not the standard, maybe I would even say in Western Europe, because it's quite different from the very industrialized, high input kind of farming that we know. And a lot of the government subsidies and a lot of the government regulation is really geared towards that kind of high intensive industrial farming, and not towards a farming that's less intensive or that doesn't want to use pesticides or wants to be able for people to live on the farm, because apparently that's really not that easy and you have to cut through a lot of red tape to be able to do that. So when I look at my parents' farm and the way they farm, it's really because they had a vision of, we want to have a fundamentally different food system where there is healthy and good quality food available for as many people as possible without damaging the earth. And that really is not something that fits into how we have constructed our global food system. And therefore, everything they do is really because they believe and they want to have a different farming system. And that means that you have to always find a way around the rules, around the regulations, find ways to gather your own funds or get access to land that maybe other farmers wouldn't want to have, or maybe don't want to be on, like, for example, a piece of land that's very close to a nature area, or that is can't be produced or used as intensively. And therefore, I always say the government hasn't really helped this way of farming. They really very often don't see this way of farming as a necessary system for the future. And I say this is the only way that we can have food production and a healthy earth and a socially just society. But the government definitely doesn't see it that way, and I feel therefore it's something that has been created now. My parents have been doing this for 28 years, and the farm is doing very well. They've done this despite the government. I think, I don't know, I can't reflect too much on the Genneperhoeve because I don't know it as well as my parents' farm, of course. I know that they work very closely with the municipality here because they do a lot of education. They're very close to the city. They make use of the municipal grounds for a lot of the food production and the grazing of the cows. But it is also, this way of farming is definitely an exception. And it isn't seen as something that is really nice to educate people, to show that this is how you can keep cows, this is what a chicken looks like. But it's not acknowledged as something that should be the standard. And therefore, I think that the only way currently to achieve these kinds of farms, these kinds of places, is if you, as a farmer or as a community, have your own vision of this is how I want it to be, and we're going to fight for this, and we're going to make sure it gets realized. if you don't have that vision or you're not able to carry out that vision, then these kinds of farms wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be a shame.
Yes, no, I think they're very important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
And you
sure.
mentioned that the lands of the Genneperhoeve, the lands they use, are partially also from the municipality or financed by the municipality.
I think for a lot of, especially farmers that farm close to cities, so that's both for my parents' case, but also here, you don't really own the lands, as in the lands are from the municipality or maybe from like a nature organization, and you have contracts or relations or agreements that you can maintain the lands or use the lands, and that often means that there's also quite some stipulations or rules or agreements on what to do. So here at the Genneperhoeve, it also means that as a farmer, you don't just produce food, but you also have a responsibility to do a lot of nature management next to that. Or you have a responsibility to, and also a desire. I mean, it's a wish. It's not that they feel like, oh, we have to do this. It's, you see it as a farmer, as someone who produces food and takes care of the earth. So therefore, also the nature, of course. But also, for example, that your land is open for people, that people can go for a walk next to the field or can visit your farm, things like that. I think that then becomes part of that agreement. But also, if you want to be a farmer that is more connected to non-farming people or people that live in the cities, then these kinds of systems are necessary. Because the first step for people to even understand biodynamic farming or nature-inclusive farming is if they are able to actually visit these spaces. And I think in the Netherlands, a lot of the farms are either quite far away from cities or are very closed off because they don't have that luxury or option to open up their doors to everyone.
Yeah. Which is also why Genneperhoeve and the Stadsboerderij Almere are special places, that they're so close to the city and accessible to people. Was that something you also had in mind when looking for another place to work that was important to you, that it was close or connected to education, the city, people from outside to see how this farm works?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think the reason I want to be a farmer, I mean, I am a farmer in a way, is because I see it as a really important role, not because of good and healthy food production, but because as a farmer, you both very much are in the reality of being with nature, producing food, knowing what's going on literally in the ground. But at the same time, you are also in a position to connect so many more people with food and the reality of farming. And I wouldn't want to be a farmer that doesn't have the option to bring that connection or to motivate people or to educate people. Because I think that these kinds of places, like the Genneperhoeve and Stadsboerderij, these kinds of farms, I mean, we sometimes call them like these kinds of islands, where there is this different reality of our farming system being created. These by themselves are not gonna be able to change our food system. They're extremely important now for education, for building up these spaces. But if we truly want a just food system, we need more organization and more mobilization outside of the farm. And therefore, I think educating people on that is the first step. And I wouldn't want to be a farmer if I couldn't also do that. Because just doing it in your own bubble, to me, it wouldn't feel like it could bring about the change that is necessary.
Yeah, I understand. Let's move to your studies that you also already mentioned. You studied at the International Institute of Social Studies, and you studied in the direction of agriculture. And I think a big part of that studies were questions around how can we bring about a socially just transition in agriculture, which are questions that are super important in a time where a lot of farmers do not feel heard or seen. And we've seen a lot of farmers' protests coming up through entire Europe and also in the Netherlands, especially due to the reduction nitrogen plans that have been announced by the government in 2022. How do you think these kind of nitrogen reduction plans, but also in general environmental regulations, nature protection, can be achieved in a socially just manner, whilst also improving the livelihoods of farmers?
Yes. Oh, this is the question, of
It
course.
is, yeah.
Yeah, so I think in my studies, when I wanted to do my master's, I was thinking, okay, do I want to go and study agriculture in a very practical manner, learn how to sow a carrot or, I don't know, milk a cow? And I was like, I know that partially, and also I can learn in practicality by working on a farm. But to me, that question that you just asked about, we have a vision for as a movement for agroecology, there is a vision for this is the kind of just food system that we need to survive and to thrive in the future. But whenever we talk about agricultural transition, there is a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of backlash, and a lot of reluctance, anger, frustration, when we actually want to say, okay, we need to fundamentally change. So how does that work? Why is that there? Where does that come from? Where does the frustration that many farmers feel come from? Where does the anger that we saw during the protest, where does that come from? Those are the questions I've been asking for quite a while, and that was also something that in my studies I could really dive into, and I wanted to. And I think if we look at the situation in the Netherlands and in Europe with the protests, there's a lot of different things that can be said, and there's a lot of details and a lot of reasons why things ended up the way they are. And I could talk about it for hours, but I think in essence, what we see is that we have created a food system that is completely run for profit. It's no longer about food for people, it's about how can we produce as much profit. And you've seen over the decades that farmers are being squeezed out because of the system. It's either you have to grow, become more intensive, become bigger, or you get out. And we've also seen so many people leaving the farming world, to put it that way. And at the same time, we also see this anxiety and this fear about the climate that's changing and the environment that is degrading at an alarming rate, and this need of we need to change, we need to do something about this. And agriculture, as we know it now, industrial agriculture has such a massive impact. So therefore, we need better environmental regulations, but we also need to have this profitable system there. How do we do that together? And I think the issue is that currently it is either or. It's the idea of either we save the environment or we continue along the road that we're doing now. And for a lot of farmers, that is their perception. It's if these environmental regulations that are now talked about, for example, the nitrogen emissions reduction, if these become reality, I can no longer exist. I think there's two questions that need to be asked. One is, are the environmental regulations that we're currently pursuing, are those the ones that are actually necessary? Is that the way to achieve this? And secondly, is there a future or a way that we can think about a farming system that these farmers do not have to leave? And neither of those two questions are really being pursued or really being presented as an option. Instead, what we see is these really, I always say it's, when you look at the way that nitrogen emissions are currently being calculated and looked at, it's really about how can we change all these numbers behind the comma and hopefully shift the balance a little bit so that maybe the reduction will be less in this specific area. But there's never the question, okay, we need to drastically lower the emissions. What is necessary to do that? And how can we do it together? Instead, it's more about, if we just move this farm into that direction and if we take these cows away there, then we can kind of patch up the broken system. If you look at the EU level as well, the environmental regulations that are currently put in place are just there to uphold the current industrial, neoliberal, capitalist system that's there. and not there to fundamentally change the way that we produce food or fundamentally help or heal the earth or help people. And instead, we get environmental regulations. That means that farmers have to even jump through more hoops to make ends meet. But also, they're not being given the tools to fundamentally change their farm, even if they would want to. They're not provided with the proper education or knowledge or the funds to say, okay, yes, sure, I will reduce my herd with, I don't know, I have 1,000 cows, I'll take it back to 100 cows, but I need the space to do that. I need to know that that's possible, and I need to know that there's a government that says we do want a different, less animal-intensive farming system. We want to have a future where you can have a fair price and we can produce in a balance with nature. But that's not even a discussion. It's about how do we maintain the current system, make it look a little bit greener, and just, ramble on. And if there's some casualties on the way, well, we just, your loss. Knowing that you can have a just income as a farmer and produce in a green, I do it in quotation marks, but like in an environmentally just way, knowing that is an option, I think is the first step. And if we don't talk about that, and if we don't present the facts that there are so many farmers doing this already, then you're going to always have that clash of people or farmers not wanting to change, and a government that is pushing through regulations that are not going to solve the actual issue. Yeah.
That was a little crash course of your studies, right?
I was like, okay, oh god. This is, it's such a complex thing to answer in a short moment.
It is, but I can also see that it's something that you're passionate about and that you feel for. Of course, it's your world.
It's my world, but also to me, I think, I sometimes say to people, I think I even mentioned to you this morning, like if I lived in a different world, I would be doing this, this, and this. To me, farming and food production is so essential in how we perceive and how we interact with the world around us. And it's so essential. It can be such a big change in how we construct our societies. Through food and the connections that are there, through food production, the connection with nature, so much is possible in its transformation. And therefore, I feel like it is sometimes like a matter of life or death. If we don't change our food system and everything that comes with that, then we are not going to be able to tackle these really insane topics like, this climate change that's coming at us at such an alarming rate, but also the increasing social inequality that we have and the tensions that come from that. If we don't say we want a food system that produces food for people and for all people, then we're not going to be able to solve all the other problems that we have. And therefore I see it as and also if we don't have that, I can't be a farmer. If you don't have a system like that, I can maybe say goodbye to my farm in a few years because there's not going to be much to do, or if there's not, So therefore it feels like
it's not a choice.
It's not a choice, yeah. That's it.
I hear in your story, also a lot of the politics or the bigger structures keep on basically having the same vision and the same way of acting that we've seen for decennia, that just seems to stay super short-sighted and not actually look in the future what we actually need to live in a sustainable and socially just manner. But just like you said, looking at the digits behind the comma and what are the little things we can do now to stay in the system we are in, but kind of make it look a little bit more greener. But I'm also thinking maybe fundamentally underlying is the question of how to gain back trust from farmers towards the government, since this trust has been broken over and over and over again in the last decennia. And like you said, the tools that need to be given to farmers to be able to transition in a more sustainable manner that are not in place right now. But if they would be, and if there would be more education, then still there would be, I think, a big need for trust to be gained back from farmers. How could that be done? Or do you think that's maybe something that would also gradually increase when the government actually starts to change their policies?
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, because I know that some people would make the argument that there has throughout history always been distrust between farmers and any kind of institution, that there is this farmers really set on doing things the way they've been doing, the way they learned it from their father or their grandfather. So I think there's a lot there to go into that I can't answer now. So maybe we leave aside the question of is it in the farmer's nature to be distrustful? I don't think so, but there's definitely a history there that makes farmers a little bit, not very keen on government, or maybe even feel disconnect from government because the government has been in a lot of ways always at quite a big distance. Literally, as in another city and not on the countryside, but also a lot of the attention from the government has not been on the countryside. So there's already this disconnect. And I think definitely that winning back that trust, I think it can be done in many ways. I think there will always be some kind of distrust. And I think the most important thing is to remember that if you look at the farmers that we have now in the Netherlands, and then I'm not speaking about all farmers because there's so many different ones, but a large chunk of the farmers that are here because they have been extremely successful at doing farming the way that the government and our society, the big companies, have been wanting to do farming. So these are kind of the winners of this industrial, highly intensive system. And therefore you see this frustration and reluctance to change, because this is kind of the direction that farmers have been pushed and also willing to go. I'm not saying it's just, the farmers just left over to the system. I mean, it's also, of course, own agency. But there's definitely been this push of, well, if you go along with this system, you're gonna be successful, profitable. And a lot of farmers have been. But those are also the farmers that have this vision of, so this is the only way that we can do farming. So I think definitely if we talk about transforming our farming system and gaining trust, it's about being able to show that you can do farming in a fundamentally different way, and be supported in that. And it also means that we have to look at what else do we need in our food system. And I think that just saying, we're going to change the way we farm with the farmers we have now, is not going to cut it, because there's not enough people to bring about this change. So definitely making it way easier for young people or older people that want to start farming, maybe again, or that want to start farming for the first time, are able to do so. And I feel like that is there, I think, a really important aspect is being missed. We always talk about how do you fix the relation with the farmers that are there now, and I always say, but there's also this aspect, we need more farmers. So how do we bring in these young people that really want to farm but don't have access to these the tools, or don't have access to the land, or to these spaces to farm, or don't feel welcome in these spaces to farm. So rather than just talking about how do we fix the relation that is broken, it's also about how do we build new relations. And I think that if we don't start there, then maybe in a few years we'll have another break of trust, because these farmers have definitely been set in a way that makes it very difficult to show that we can do farming differently if this is what has been said to them for decades, and this is the only way they know.
Yeah. We've also lost a lot of farms and farmers over the last decennia, which is also something you've mentioned in the speech that some people might actually know you from, that you gave at the shareholders meeting of the Rabobank in 2022. And you were the first person to do this for the Rabobank, to buy a certificate and get into the meeting to tell the bank how destructive the system of agriculture is, of scaling up and of intensification, that they are for a super big part financing. In your speech, you also say that you have a lot of colleagues around you that would like to transition into a more sustainable practice, but are not getting any response or support from the Rabobank. How is it possible that the Rabobank is able to uphold such a powerful position, and that so many farmers also keep on turning to them for their loans?
Yeah, so I think up to now, when we've talked about the protests, we talk about the government and farmers as these two parties that are involved. But I think a really important aspect, and that's also why I showed up at the Rabobank in the first place, in this dynamic, is the influence of the agro-industry. Because if we look at the policies that have been made over the last decades, the influence of the agro-industry in lobbying and in providing funds and in providing knowledge both to farmers and to the government has been really, really massive. And as we talked about before, if we have a food system that's built on creating only profit in the first place, then there is a lot of interest by these big companies, and Rabobank is an example as a bank that provides money for farmers and other big agro companies. But when we talk about the agro industry, we also talk about seed producers, pesticide producers, artificial manure producers. So think about Syngenta, Yara, Bayer, Monsanto, and also, of course, the meat lobby, which is the factory farms, but also the big slaughterhouses and all those, really massive, in the globally active companies. They have so much need of keeping the system the way it is now, because that is the way they make profit. If we shift to an agro-ecological system where we're not dependent on all these inputs, where we don't need these massive slaughterhouses, where we don't need any pesticides, there's no profit for these companies to make. So wanting to keep the system the way it is to them essential in their survival. And therefore, creating this tension, or this existence of this tension and distrust between farmers and government, is to these agro-industry companies really, really beneficial. Building onto that, what we also see in Europe, and we also see in the Netherlands, these moments of friction means that these companies can come in and lobby for upkeeping the current system. It means taking away environmental regulations that might have come in place. If we see the Green New Deal right now, so much of it is being lobbied away by exactly these companies. Or saying, well, we stand with our farmers, we need our farmers, we are proud of our farmers. Any kind of way to show that the current system is needed, necessary, and we cannot do without it. And then, so we don't talk a lot about that. We often talk about farmers, we talk about the government. In my opinion, especially until the protests, we really didn't talk about the agro industry. And my frustration with the Rabobank has been for quite a while already. If you look at their portfolio, they finance about 85% of all farmers in the Netherlands. And they have also been at the government table in a lot of ways when it comes to climate talks, when it comes to talks about reduction of the livestock population in the Netherlands, when it comes about the deregulation of certain rules about how to keep animals or things like that. They've always been involved, and they've always given advice, put it in quotation marks, and they've always dictated the rules when a farmer could get a loan and when they couldn't. And therefore it means that if you're going to talk about a change in a farming system and you're going to go to an individual farmer and say, why do you have a stable with 2,000 pigs? You need to change. But they are locked into this loan with the bank that has told them over and over again, if you grow your barn, if you buy this many more pigs, your profits will go up by this, and we will give you that loan with this and this interest rate. You're not really talking towards the big guy, to put it that way. That one individual farmer is not going to make a difference, but a bank that finances 85% of this industrial farming system is going to be that difference. And I think therefore this, even just getting that discussion going and saying, hey, we need to talk about these really big agro-industrial companies. We need to talk about the Rabobank. Making that visible was the first step. It was a very on a whim decision. Let's go to a shareholder meeting, buy a certificate, go there and talk about this. Just to show this frustration and this, make it, how do you say it? Make it a topic of discussion. That a lot of farmers want to change and can't because they are stuck with a loan that they can't pay off if they change, or even worse, they will go to the bank and say, hey, I've heard this myself as a farmer who said, hey, I would really like to become less intensive. I want to buy extra land and also part of it, make it nature inclusive, so doing part of it nature and part of it agriculture, and I need a loan for that. And the bank said, sure, but only if you go from 100 to 150 cows, and then we will give you your loan. If that is happening and farmers feel like they can't talk about this, it is really important to create that kind of public discussion. And I'm very, happy that I've been able to do that a little bit, and a lot of other people have. It's not been just me. But because it has not been something that farmers talk about, and because the Rabobank has been historically a agricultural bank for so many decades, it's a logical place to go to. It's the bank that has the most knowledge about agriculture, that wants to finance farmers, and therefore you keep coming back. If you had a loan, if you have maybe all your financial organization with that bank, you'll go back to them and be like, hey, I would like to expand my farm, or I would like to change this and this. Could you give me a loan? Your dad has been with the Rabobank, so you also are with the Rabobank. They really are very good at their advertisement. They make a lot of green advertisements about, we support our farmers, we are changing the Dutch agriculture, we are building a more sustainable or more sturdy agriculture. And people come back to them. If we don't talk about what they're actually doing and the really, really polluting and damaging investments that they're making, not just here, but across the world, if that's not even a topic of conversation, of course, people are just going to think, oh, Rabobank, cooperative, farmers bank, boerenleenbank, as we say in Dutch. Yeah, sure, of course, they're just financing agriculture, good for them. And I think that's the reason why farmers keep going back. Secondly, there is not a lot of other options for farmers to get their finances sorted in a different way. If you currently look at the money that's needed for a transition for farmers, and then we talk about if we keep the rest of the capitalist system going, we're just gonna need money to get these farms changed, then that's quite a lot, and there's not a lot of banks that are interested in what they would call these risky investments. To put it maybe simplified, a bank doesn't have any interest in supporting a farm that isn't gonna be reliant on a lot of inputs. If you have a farm that is very financially healthy and of its own and doesn't require continuous growth to be able to exist, a bank's not going to be able to make a lot of money from that. And I think that is something that banks, of course, are not going to proclaim, because it would basically mean, there's a different way to do this, but it's without us. But I think, that is in the end a really big issue.
And it already inherently shows this capitalistic system of only investing in something that's going to grow and give more money and invest again, and the cycle keeps going.
I mean, that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's fundamental. We need to change that. It's just that I think realizing how far that goes, and that then therefore talking about, if you just convince this individual farmer to change, or hey, there is these amazing biodynamic farms that are showing that something different can be done. Understanding that is not going to cut it, I think is the first step. Then understanding who are those who have a lot of power that are preventing that change from happening. And that's the second step, I think. Yeah. And then there's a lot more, but
that's the start. But it also means there's a lot of interaction between the bank and the farmers. It's not just the farmers going to the bank, seeking a loan or wanting to expand or get money for something, but it's also the bank, the Rabobank in this case, going to farmers in this way of advertisement and showing, hey, we have this and this deal, and aren't you interested in this, if I understand correctly?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's a characteristic of not just the Rabobank, but more agro-industrial companies in of itself. In Dutch, we often talk about these agro-industrial companies as erfbetreders, as in saying these are advisory people from these companies or case managers from these companies are basically, in a lot of ways, the only people that will still enter farms and actually talk to farmers and give them advice on what the best seed is to buy, or what the new dairy robot machine is to buy, or that it would be really good to invest in this new tractor. The government has been extremely absent from farms for a very long time. They've on purpose left it to these companies to provide information. But these companies are not just doing that by directly talking to the farmer. We also see that these companies fund a lot of the agricultural news that is out there. So within the agricultural sector, there's a lot of magazines, newsletters, websites where you can get very specific news about what's happening. And that means from like prices for potatoes in the US, because it's relevant to know that as a potato farmer here, to updates about new machines or information about new government regulations. This is really useful information for a lot of farmers and what is also widely read in the sector. But then at the same time, these magazines and these newsletters are very often funded by large agro-industrial companies. Therefore, the kind of information that's being put in these magazines fits into a very specific narrative. These magazines don't talk about all the opportunities that are out there if you want to change the way that we farm. The fundament of these magazines is the way that we currently farm, industrial farming. That's the only thing that's out there. That's the only option. Okay, and now we are going to tell you a story. In a similar way, we see these agro-industrial companies involved in research. And I think that is very visible at Wageningen University, but also different places where these companies in a way dictate the terms of what kind of research can be done. I'm not saying that no other research can be done, but if a university wants certain funds or actually gets funds from these companies, then these companies are like, well, we actually would like a research for you to show what the benefits are of this new dairy machine that we've produced. And if they don't like the outcome of that research, they won't publish it. It's to me, it's in a way that is how the system works, and it makes a lot of sense. If you can buy everything, therefore this is also something that you can buy. But so many people don't think about that. They think, well, the news I read in the morning in a newspaper or the research article that's being published, that is neutral. And I think that is something that we need to fundamentally question. I'm not saying none of it is true or none of it is...
Careful, a lot of students listening.
No, of course not. I'm not at all. And I think definitely there's truth in there. It's just you can also present a truth about a new dairy product based on Campina, but it is important to understand that there is a reason why this research is being published and maybe not a research that shows something else or that is focused on something else. Why, for example, the climate impact of this dairy product is not discussed in the research, because it has been funded by this company. If that is clear from the get-go and we understand what the interest is of this company, then we can talk about the value of the research. But if it's presented as something that is neutral and just without any other interests in it, then we're not getting the whole story. And I think that is so fundamental in how we perceive our agricultural system, in how we think that we need more food to feed the world, even though it's very clear we don't. There's a lot of research shows we don't, but these narratives are needed, and they are controlled through that media, through the research, through government lobbying, through visiting these farmers, to keep this story of this industrial farming system alive. And that is being done in a lot of different ways. And I think that talking about that, having a discussion about on campus about, okay, yes, I'm not saying Friesland Campina in of itself is evil. I think a lot of people also have the perception, you just hate the Rabobank, or you just... It's not about the Rabobank, it's not about the people that work there. A lot of people that work at these companies, of course, you're not going to work at this company because you think the company is a bad company. But we need to understand that the only way these companies can survive is for them to make profit and continuously make profit. In order to do that, you're going to have to sell narratives, you're going to have to lobby for certain regulations or less regulations on certain topics to be able to continue to exist. And that these kinds of lobby activities or these kinds of information is gonna cause harm in another way is very evident. We can see it in climate change that's happening. We can see it in so many farmers that are really, really struggling to get fair prices because they're being squeezed out by supermarkets. It's very evident that that's happening. And I'm not saying, so we fire the CEO of Rabobank and we get a new one. That's not going to change anything. As long as these companies are driven for profit, it's going to be the problem. And therefore, that's what we need to address. It's
super complex.
It's super complex and it's super simple at the same time.
At the same time it is, yeah. But these companies are dependent for existence on farms that are dependent on constant new input, otherwise they wouldn't exist. And I think it's a super good point that you're making, because I think also a lot of the people listening to this podcast are students that are connected to the Wageningen University, and that I think and hope are to some degree aware also of the influence that the agro-industry and these companies are having on our campus and also in our research, like you say, who is funding it and why are certain questions even being researched and what is being left in and what's being left out. And it's super important to be aware of that. And I think this is also slowly increasing this awareness also with the Weeding Out Agribusiness series, but in general, I think it's something that's more and more being talked about. Because you've also co-founded the agricultural branch of Extinction Rebellion. How did you roll into activism and what are you doing exactly with this agricultural branch?
I really, really, really got very scared of what was happening to the world when I was around 12 years old. And I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I want to change. I will go to a climate march. And I have been doing that for quite a few years. And I also knew from my parents and older people than me that they had been doing that for quite a while. And I got very frustrated because I felt like the time that we have is so little, and the change that is coming from signing a petition or going to a march was really not that visible. So for me, therefore, I don't exactly know if there was this one moment I was like, I need to do more, but I definitely was like, I want to be able to really show how important this is, and I feel like we need to act in a way more significant manner. And that was around the time when XR started up in the Netherlands, and I think like a few months after they had their first round of blockades at het Rijksmuseum and Blauwbrug in Amsterdam. It was in 2019. I went to a meeting to see like, okay, what is this about? I thought it was quite exciting, but also a bit strange. I was like, this is really radical. I don't know if I can do this. And then there were some people there talking about wanting to do something with agriculture. And I was like, hey, I know quite a bit about agriculture. And I immediately also had a bit of a concern that there would become this narrative, which is and used to be more prevalent in the environmental movement, of any kind of agriculture is bad for the environment. And I was very scared. I was like, okay, I would like to have this conversation about agriculture and what kind of agriculture, and actually a climate movement that supports farmers. Not all farmers, but definitely the farmers that want an agro-ecological farming system or are currently agro-ecologically farming. And that's how we got the ball rolling, and we talked about we would really like to have a group within XR that focuses on agriculture. And to me, that really was this kind of my frustration and desire to act more direct and be more involved. And both these kind of questions I have about, okay, but how can I transform an agricultural system if just doing it yourself is not going to be enough? That kind of came together in XR agriculture. And that for me was a way to put my angers and frustrations and fears into action, and at the same time be able to talk with other climate activists and educate people about, hey, we have also ways of doing agriculture that is not damaging to the earth. It can actually really help to restore ecosystems. It can really help to limit the effects of climate change. It can actually also bring about broader change that not just on an environmental level, but also on a social level. And that, for me, having that combination has been really important in my activism, next to being able to just practice agriculture. Because it always means like I can back to the field and understand what is happening here. And I can speak from my own experience and always share from that what I see and be able to start from my own story, because that is the one thing I know I feel honest and true about, and that I can connect with other people.
Yeah, and which is super valuable, I think, to have someone in an activism circle that actually has a very practically experience and knows what you're talking about. And again, also maybe sounds like it wasn't so much of a choice for you, but something that just felt like it needed to happen.
Yeah, I say a lot to people that I think over the last few years there's often has been the question, why would you want to be a farmer currently? Because people have a perception that with government regulations and policies as they are now, so many farmers will disappear. Knowing this idea of, well, the government is going to buy out farmers. That's what they perceive. And then I say, well, yeah, I am scared of my future. I'm not sure about my future as a farmer, but not because I'm scared of a buyout from the government. It's because if we don't do anything about climate change and transforming our exploitative system, I might not be a farmer. And that really switches something that people are like, wait, that you can also perceive that as a threat. I think there's a lot of this idea of, oh, a farmer, then you don't really acknowledge climate change, or if you're a farmer, then you just want to continue things the way they are. And by saying that, it's a really good starting point to talk about, okay, but what do we actually mean when we talk about farming? What do you envision when we talk about agriculture?
And to show a diversity in farming, also in farmers.
Exactly, yeah.
Then we are going to come to the difficult question. I'm wondering if there's any organization, or it can also be a certain aspect of an organization, maybe abroad or maybe something that has happened also in the past, that inspires you in the work that you are doing right now.
Yes, and it's a difficult question because I said before, I'm not sure how to answer this because there's so many groups and people and organizations that are extremely inspiring. Because I think it's so important to realize that the struggle we have here is not in isolation, but there are so many people that are fighting in the streets. I think I don't think I had like a specific group of person in mind, but I have encountered so many really inspiring people throughout the time I've been involved in activism. And I think it's that range from, like, I've encountered farmers that live in areas where they are very, how do I say that? They have an environment that is very conservative, and they have a lot of other farmers that live around them that have a very set way on how to do things. And then these farmers that actually decide, yeah, I am going to speak up about why I changed my way of farming. And I'm going to do that in this very close-knit, conservative part of the countryside, and I don't care what others are going to say. That to me is insanely inspiring, because you have not only the pressure of colleagues and friends that might really frown upon what you're saying, not understand, or even get like death threats or physical threats on your farm, but it also really means that you are acknowledging, hey, the way that we've been doing this, and we've been doing this for decades, or even the way that my colleagues have been doing this for such a long time, is not the way to go. And I want to tell that to the world. It takes quite a lot of guts to do that. I think that is really, really inspiring. And then hopefully that translating into then wanting to take action in a broader way, of course. But I think that first step, I can't imagine what that must be like as a farmer. That's definitely an inspiration. And I mean,
I like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of other,
close,
of course.
yeah.
To keep it close. Yeah, I mean, in my work, I've also met so many farmers from across the world, or other groups, and I think they're all doing amazing work. But yeah, this I think is a nice example.
Nice.
Yeah.
I also still wanted to talk about the Toekomstboeren and the agro-ecological network. Since you also mentioned that you would like to talk about this also, if we also talk about activism, since they also go together and need each other. Just for the people that are not familiar with the work of Toekomstboeren or the Agro-ecological network, could you paint a little picture of what they are and what they do?
Yeah, so Toekomstboeren is an association of farmers, and it originally was founded with this idea that there's a lot of, especially young people or people that really want to get into farming that aren't able to. And then there's this group that people can share their knowledge and their findings and their experiences with each other. But it quite quickly, since founding it, has grown into this group where farmers that want an agro-ecological farming transition and that are also farming agro-ecologically or would like to can come together to share information, but more than that, be able to stand united and hear from others. Okay, this is how you experience this. This is how I experience this. Let's team up, and that can be, for example, some of the struggles that are faced is access to land and losing land because of new government regulations or because the land prices are very, very high, and it's very difficult to get into that. And then saying, okay, well, you can fight that individually as a farmer, but if we actually organize ourselves collectively, we have a lot more power. At the same time, Toekomstboeren is also the sister organization of La Via Campesina, so we are internationally really well connected with a lot of other organizations, farming organizations around the world. And we then the biggest example recently was the protests in Brussels. La Via Campesina was very heavily present at those protests to demand fair income for small-scale farmers. And because we are connected as Toekomstboeren, we're also able to bring our story to that stage. And then I guess the Toekomstboeren you can see as farmers that fight for agro-ecological transition. And because there's many more people that do that, not just farmers, think of researchers, scientists, students, activists, people that are involved with NGOs. We've also founded the Agro-ecological network, and that's kind of this idea where some of these organizations can come together and share information with each other. We organize meetups, and but for example, also we've organized a agricultural block at the Climate March. Like, we're also visibly present in these activist spaces to say there is a wide range of people that are fighting for agro-ecological food and agro-ecological food system. We need more interconnection between these groups. It would be really nice if researchers could know what farmers need from them, or the other way around, or that farmers can see that there are activists fighting in the street for also their future, or the other way around, that there's activists that can come to a really nice green farm island, to put it that way, like a nice farm to recharge for a little bit and see, oh, this better world that I'm fighting for is already being created in these little spaces. And that is really, really important to bring that together and to mobilize within, I'm saying your group, that doesn't sound right, but like, yeah, I'm saying mobilize among farmers, but we need this mobilization to be a lot broader. And a network like Agro-ecological network really brings that together. It brings all these different people together and allows for easy connections to be made and stories to be shared, information to be shared. Yeah.
And also to bridge those gaps, I think, because of course all these different people, researchers, activists, farmers, can also be very isolated from each other in a sense, I think, and not really talking with each other rather than about each other.
No, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And this is a really good way of doing that. Yeah.
Nice.
At least we aim to be a really good way to do that. Yeah.
Because you also already mentioned activism, like the work you're also doing with XR and Toekomstboeren and the Agro-ecological network need each other. Then for me, immediately also this image pops up where I was at the A12 at the highway to block it. And then there was the group of Toekomstboeren people who were supporting us and standing on the sideline, which was really beautiful. I think it was also a day that farmers were also protesting a bit further ahead in Den Haag as well. And it really showed this image of, hey, there's such a diversity in farmers and it's not one pile of people and perspectives and opinions. And there's these green farmers then that are supporting the activism. And you've also mentioned you want to continue working in agriculture, whilst also juggling, I think, a lot of different balls, as it seems, a lot of different directions that you're involved in. Is there something that you feel gives you the most personally, or maybe also a field where you feel like you're making the biggest impact?
I think it's a continuous search. How to direct your energy and time and motivation. There was quite a while, I think, especially during COVID when we were all at home, that I really had this sense that the only way to be as impactful as possible is to be involved in organizing and doing as much direct action as possible, being as much out on the street as I could. And I think that's definitely very important, but I also think it's important to find a way that you can carry that work out long term. I want the world to be saved yesterday, but unfortunately, I think we all know that that's going to be quite a long struggle, and therefore taking care of the kind of limited motivation and energy that you have is really important. So I think it's really about finding in the moment the space that I get energy from, and I can also give energy, and that really varies. It has been times that I could go to give talks at meetups for XR for a whole week, and I could be in a million different places at the same time, and I got a lot of energy from that and it felt amazing. And there have also been times that I just wanted to be with my cows the whole day and not talk to people about anything. But I think those are two extremes, and it's more about finding a way that I can milk my cows in the morning and feel happy and good about that, and then maybe in the evening have time to be present at a meeting, or to find time to be able to, talk in a podcast like this, which is really nice, without it costing too much energy. So I think it's finding that balance, but at the same time really important that you don't get lost in one or the other. Just retracting on your farm and thinking, because here I know what I can do and I know best what to do, can also be quite dangerous, because it means you lock yourself off from the rest of the world, and that fear of everything is gonna go wrong and I don't know what to do really grows. At the same time, only fighting in the streets can also really cause exhaustion. So it's a continuous, and talking about it with other people, it's quite nice.
Helpful, yeah. A continuous search also to combine the different directions. A very broad question also, in a way, or to see what you are expecting from the European elections, or what you are also maybe hoping for from the European elections, since they're coming up. And actually, as this podcast launches, they will already be in the past. But yeah, I'm wondering if there's anything that you are hoping for that could change agricultural policy in a positive way.
Yeah, I think the visibility of agro-ecological farmers, of small-scale farmers, of green farmers during the protests in Brussels has been really, really important. I know that in the Dutch media it hasn't been very visible, but if you look for it, it's definitely there, and especially in a lot of more European-wide or in news coverage by other countries, it's definitely made a lot of attention to why are these farmers also in the streets. It has resulted in conversations with certain European parties or with the administration offices in Brussels, and I think that's really relevant. However, the struggle with the European elections is that the tendency that we see now, which is like a move towards the right-wing parties and win by right-wing parties, I think it will definitely continue, and that is scary, especially knowing that Europe has such an insanely big impact on our agricultural policies in the Netherlands as well. And I feel like it's something that a lot of people don't realize or are not very concerned with. It really feels like, well, that's quite far away from what I'm doing. I can't really focus on that or think about that. But also for activists, I feel like it's really something that we don't focus on enough. The CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, is so fundamental in where money goes to, what subsidies goes to, what kind of agriculture. Transforming that is an insane task, but it's a necessary task, and that really starts with these kinds of elections. So I think hoping for, if we're realistic, I don't think much will change, unfortunately. But being aware that so much does get, how do I say it? Nothing changes because of the EU, but they continue. They have such a big impact on the way that things are. And I feel like being aware of that, and maybe hopefully the European elections will bring more awareness to that by people, is really important. So I really hope that it means that next round there's a lot more people on the street fighting for something else. The podcast goes out when it's done. So I would say maybe read up on actually what Europe does with agricultural policies, because it's insane the amount of money that goes on in there. Next time there is a protest in Brussels or elsewhere against European policies, join. Yeah.
Nice. That's a nice call out to end with. We'll also definitely link some information to Toekomstboeren and the Agro-ecological network and to Extinction Rebellion agriculture, so people can definitely read up on it and look further into it if they're interested. But for now, thank you very much for the conversation and for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. That was very valuable. Keep doing what you're doing, because you're doing a lot, but also take care of yourself. But you're doing a lot of really cool things, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me and giving me the space. And same goes to Boerengroep. You're also doing amazing, so very keen to see what's next.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and that it provided you with some valuable knowledge. If you're interested in the work that Roos is doing and the organizations that she's involved in, be sure to check out the links in the description below of this episode. If you want to know more about the Boerengroep Wageningen, the organization behind this podcast, you can also find our details in the same description. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and you can also come to one of our open meetings every other Tuesday or to one of our informal breaks every other Thursday, where we chat and we enjoy drinks together. If you have any questions or if you just want to reach out to this podcast, feel free to send us an email on podcast_diggingdeeper@outlook.com. Thanks again for listening and have a good day.